Okay, so I'm just going to share my testimony and what God has done in my life. So my story, it begins, as a kid that was broken, coming from people that were addicts, my mother and my father, and at the early stages of my life, and being around a lot of chaos, and moving from place to place, just different things, and it produced me growing up with a lot of resentment and things broken inside of me. And then as a teenager, I began to lash out and began to drink and hang out with all the wrong people and do all the wrong things. And you couldn't tell me nothing and this and that. And then when I had my children, I had a horrible pain pill addiction. And by that time, it had just completely spiraled out of control to the point that if I didn't have pain pills and I was horribly sick, and I was in abusive relationships and just all these different things. And then one day, everything just became too heavy, and I'd gotten to this horrible fight with the father of my children, and I left. And when I left, I didn't think that it was going to transpire the way that it did, but then he wouldn't allow me to see the kids and all this other kind of stuff. And instead of fighting for my children as a mother should do, I walked away. And within 2 weeks of me walking away, I was shooting up meth. And I began to get pulled into this drug world. And I would stay there, submerged in there for years and years and years, and being from trap house to trap house, in and out of jails, in and out of county jails, all these things, abusive relationships, being used to be able to do whatever, to obtain drugs, lying, stealing, manipulating. And I just immersed myself in this world. And not only that, then I began to open myself up to occult practices. I began to get into the tarot cards and the witchcraft and all these different things. And even through all of that, the thing about it was, before I had opened the door to that, I carried a Bible everywhere that I went, even in my addiction. Even though I grew up in all these things, I had a grandfather that was a preacher. So I was raised to know the Lord. But the thing about it was, as my addiction began to grow, it was like I began to open up more darkness into my life. And then I had questions about, well, what is this and what is that? And then I began to get pulled into the occult practices. And when I did that, it opened up this dark realm that I never should have opened. And it just emerged darkness, even more darkness upon me. And as I'm sitting there, I even opened myself up to the point, because it grew just like any kind of other sin, it grows. At first, there were certain things that I wouldn't research or I wouldn't do. But by the end of it, I was even beginning to research Satanism to see what it was about. And as I was beginning to do these things, it was like this guy came into my life that was a Satanist. Because the enemy has a plan for your life just as well as God has a plan for your life. And as I got pulled into this, there was this moment, this guy, and he was like, let's go. He said, I needed this lick. And I'm like, okay. So I began to set up this whole scheme to go into this house that this guy lived at, that he was gone, and go in and rob and go in and steal. So that way we could get enough money. And so we went in a group of us, we went in there and we began to steal, the guns, everything out of this house. And as we began to do that, about 6 months later, I got arrested for it. And I'm sitting there, and now I'm in jail, and my bond's too high for this one. Now it's not no petty stuff. It's not no little county jail. I have to sit there. Nobody's coming to bond me out, and I'm sitting there in jail. And as I'm sitting there, all I could think about was my grandfather, when I was a little girl, how he would always have Christian music playing every time. And at the time as a kid, I didn't appreciate that, And all I could think about, we had these tablets. I was in Tippahawk County Jail, and we had these tablets where we could listen to music. And I was coming off all these drugs, and I was withdrawing, and now I can't run from what I've done. I can't run from the things I've done to my children. I can't run to the things that I've done to myself, where I lacked all self-respect. And I'm sitting there, and I'm so sick that I cannot pick myself up off this mat in jail. And I'm sitting there, and I know that I'm going to go to prison. And I'm having to face all this. And I put that tablet in, and I put some Christian music on. And in that moment, something happened in that jail cell. I cried out to God. And when I cried out to God, it was like the peace of God fell upon me in that jail cell. And I knew that he was real. Everybody had told me that he was real. Growing up, they said that he was real. And I was searching for that and all that occult stuff. I was seeking the truth. And the truth hit me like a ton of bricks sitting in that jail cell. He was the answer. And he was real. And I just began to weep in that jail cell. And after that, I began to read my Bible and it began to come alive. The scriptures began to come alive and I understood it. And I began to pray for people and all this stuff. But even then, I ran from God. There was times that I ran from God. This has been a process for me. I would love to say that I got set on fire for the Lord and I had this encounter with him and I went after him with my whole heart, but that's not the truth. There's been times that he had to break me down and get me to a place of complete surrender. And the next few years would be a place of him getting me to surrender. And I went to Teen Challenge and I began to experience the Lord in a brand new way. And he grew me and all this stuff. But there was this area of my life that he wanted me to give him and I would not give him the whole time that I was there, because when he asked me to give this up, there was pain that came with it. And it was this relationship. And when the pain came, I ran from it because that's what I did. So I would mentally not go there with the Lord and I would shut that healing out. So when I left Teen Challenge the first time, and I left there and I came to Broken Lives and I became a house mother because I felt like the Lord was leading me there even then. But knowing now how perfect he is, it was because of the people that I would meet there that now are walking in my life also when he would bring me back to the area years later. And as I was sitting there, because I would not allow him to heal those broken places in my heart, when I got there, everything was good for a while. But then when that person reached out to me, I left. And within that day, I was sitting there getting high again. And not only was I getting high again, but then for the next 6 months, I would sit there and I would fall further. Because let me tell you something, if God has pulled you out of something and you go back to it, there is torment that you open yourself up to that is crazy. I was mentally, physically worse off than I had been the whole time that I was in those years of addiction. And I went right back to the pig pen. I went right back to everything. And I'm sitting there, and all I can do is I'm a shell of a person again. I've lost everything. And I'm sitting there, and I got my Bible open. And I'm sitting there high, and I have worship music on because I was just trying to get into the presence of God because I was being tormented so bad. And the enemy spoke to me through a person. I was sitting there and they looked at me and they said, "Your God cannot save you now." And I was sitting there and I got up and I went into this bathroom and I knew that I was fixing to die. I could feel the spirit of death that was fixing to come towards me. And I knew that if I was right on the verge of it, I could feel it. And I sat there in this mirror and I looked at myself and I was so broken down. I looked and I said, "God." And I cried out to God again. And I said, "God, I need you. I need you, Lord. Please save me. I've done got too far down. I cannot get myself out of this, Lord. And I need you." And it was 2 days later that my PO called me. He said, "If you don't get in here, we're going to arrest you." And I knew that it was God. I knew that was God. And I left and I went and met him. And I told him, I said, "Look," I said, "I need help." And that was my moment of full surrender. That was my moment of, "God, I'm never doing this again. God, please forgive me. Whatever you want to do with my life, whatever you want me to release, whatever it looks like, no matter the pain that comes behind it, no matter what I face, God, I am yours and I will not turn back." And so the next 5 hours, I waited for them to get an arrest warrant to arrest me because I was so done. And so that way they could get me help somewhere. And so now I'm sitting back in Oktibbeha County Jail, and I'm sitting there, and as I'm sitting there, I hear the Lord tell me, "I want you to go back to Teen Challenge." And I heard him say, "Give me 2 years." And so I said, "Lord, whatever you want me to do, God, that's what I'm going to do." And it was several months I sat in jail, and I just began to put worship music on, and I just began to get in his presence because at that time I was still being tormented. You know what I mean? And that was the only thing that would release it was his presence. And so I go back to Teen Challenge for a year. I stayed there another year. And during this time, the Lord just began to heal my heart. I began to give him every bit of pain. I began to give him, release the things that he would ask me to release. And we began to go through this thing together. And then I stayed another year and I worked there. And as I'm working there and he's healing me, he's beginning to show me these other women that are coming in there. And then I'm beginning to pour into them through him. And he's beginning to help me to see, you know what I mean, my purpose and different things like that. And then the Lord told me, I was sitting one day and I was with him in that secret place. And he told me that I would go to Tupelo. And I didn't know what that looked like. I didn't know how that would transpire. I didn't know anything like that. But he told me that I would go to Tupelo. And I said, okay, Lord. He said, you know, and he told me how he had been preparing me there to heal my heart and to begin to teach me how to fight, you know, spiritually and seek him and to trust him and build our relationship up. And then when he told me to go, I'm not going to lie, like I was scared. I was scared to death. You know, when you have to take that step of faith and you have to step out, especially with the way my past was and how, you know, I had failed each time. But when he told me to go, I had no vehicle. I had no driver's license. I had absolutely nowhere to stay. I didn't have a job. I didn't have all these things. But within months, it was like he got my license. My uncle gave me a vehicle, just a title over this uncle that had absolutely nothing to do with me because of my addiction. And he gave me a vehicle and said that the Lord told him to. And my license, and then when I got to the area, I was staying with a friend from Teen Challenge, but I was living in Boonville, and I got a job in Tupelo, though. And then I met Laura Clark, and then she's awesome, and then the Lord placed me with her, and she's like, why don't you just live with me? So now I'm in Tupelo. And as I've been doing that, the Lord has just been opening up doors, you know what I mean, for me, as far as he's beginning to open up doors for jail ministry and different things and everything like that. And he's just been doing a work in my life. My children are restored back into my life. You mean something that I never thought would be tangible. I'm going to ball practices and ball games and all these things. And they've been getting to go to church with me at times. And God has just begun to do a work in my life. And the thing about it is, it's when you submit to him, it's when you fully surrender to him, then he is able to do a work in your life. God does not want pieces of your heart. He wants the whole thing. And the thing about it is there's going to be areas of your life that you're going to have to surrender to him. And it's going to be painful, but God knows what is best for you. And when you begin to do those things, then God will begin to do a work in your life. And it's not about you. It's about the people that he wants to touch through you. It's not about us doing any kind of work. It's him and him placing his spirit inside of you and doing the work that he's given you to do. So right now, I feel like I'm just in that beginning stages of doing what the Lord has me to do in whatever area that is. Sometimes it's praying for people at work. Sometimes it's praying for people on the street. Sometimes it's whatever he's wanting me to do. I just want to be available to him now that my life is surrendered to him.
Thank you again for listening. If you would like prayer or special prayer or anything like that, we've created an email address that you can reach out to us at. It's realtimepodcast2024@gmail.com. We just want to make sure that all your needs are met.